Just 5 days after the end of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln is the final of the 600,000 deaths in America's bloodiest conflict. The country is divided, and the world looks at American democracy as a failed experiment. But what most don't realize is that a new era has dawned. The nation is entering an age of advancement. And from the void left by the death of perhaps the greatest statesman we will ever know, a new breed of leader will emerge.
The Rockefellers, the Fords, the Carnegies were the first generation of what we know is now the entrepreneurial rock stars, or what are today are the Buffetts and the Jobs and the Gates. They were the ones that set the standard for the American dream. They owned a new frontier, literally and figuratively, of who we are as a culture.
Men of insight, innovation, and ingenuity, the likes of which the world has never seen. And over the next 5 decades, this small group will change history, propelling the United States of America to greatness.
These were great men with a vision that nobody else had. And that's why in the last century, that 50-year period, we built the world.
For the first time in the country's short existence, the man most capable of leading America is not a politician. He's a self-made man who, through sheer force of will, turned a poor upbringing on the docks of New York Harbor into an empire. At 16, Cornelius Vanderbilt buys a small ferry boat with a $100 loan. He quickly earns a reputation as a cutthroat businessman, willing to use any means necessary to get ahead.
Back then, it was just pure competition. My brain against your brain, my effort against your effort. You just competed. That's the way they looked at business. It was the wild, wild west, and by hook or crook, it was just win or lose, and the best win.
He was a tough guy, getting into scraps with other men, beating the hell out of them and knocking them unconscious. That competitive streak and that toughness very much defined his character.
His single ferry soon becomes a fleet of ships, transporting goods and passengers to every corner of the growing country. Vanderbilt will become so synonymous with shipping that his nickname becomes the Commodore.
I think Vanderbilt recognized that what was going to be important is transporting goods from one place to another. And he had this idea that required infrastructure, and not infrastructure that the government was going to provide, but that he was going to provide.
Over the next 40 years, Vanderbilt builds the largest shipping empire in the world. Then, at the peak of his power, just before the Civil War, he does the unthinkable. Work is underway on the first transcontinental railroad, and the Commodore realizes that its completion will transform America, slashing cross-country travel time by months.
Railroads were absolutely liberating because the railroads allowed cheap and efficient transportation from one corner of America to another.
Vanderbilt sees his future. He sells all of his ships and invests everything he has in railroads.
You talk about seeing around corners as an element of success. That's what differentiates the good leader. Not many people have it. Not many people can predict that corner. That is a characteristic of great leaders.
His decision to invest heavily in rail pays off. By the end of the war, Vanderbilt is the richest man in America, with a net worth of over $68 million, the equivalent of $75 billion today. But all that money can't buy his escape from the war's devastation. In the wake of the Civil War, the country mourns publicly, while Vanderbilt does so privately.
The first card is the past, the second, the present, and the third is the future. There has been an unexpected loss. Someone close to you.
My son, George. He died in the war. What about the future?
The chariot. There will be a war.
War's over.
No. Your war is about to begin.
Watch it, man.
Tormented by the loss of his favorite son, Vanderbilt's empire is more vulnerable than ever before.
For Vanderbilt, this is a great tragedy. He had one son who had that same sense of physical strength and ability, and he had died when he was still quite young. It was deeply troubling for the Commodore.
For years, Vanderbilt groomed George to take over the family business. Now, the Commodore is forced to rely on his less accomplished son, William.
I'm making you operations director of the Hudson Railroad.
Vanderbilt places William in the midst of negotiations with the owners of a rival railroad.
So name your price.
If you give us your freight year-round, we will give you the privilege of allowing your passengers access into Manhattan for $200,000.
That privilege is not worth $200,000.
Then let us settle on $100,000. I believe that to be a fair and generous offer.
I'm not really interested in your generosity. I'm only interested in getting the best deal for my shareholders. And that does not include handing over $100,000 or even $1.
My father wants only what he believes is right.
The trouble is, your father doesn't know what is right. The old man should be put out to pasture.
The message is clear. The competition no longer sees Vanderbilt as a man to fear.
People are always rooting for very successful people to fail. The day people are not taking shots at you, it means you're not on top anymore.
But where they see weakness, the Commodore sees an opportunity to assert his dominance and teach William what it means to be a Vanderbilt.
If they want a war, I'll give them a war.
Vanderbilt owns the only rail bridge into New York City. It's the gateway to the country's largest port, supplying the entire continent. Vanderbilt knows this is the hammer he needs to beat his rivals into submission.
Sit down. I want you to close the Albany Bridge.
Without the bridge, every other railroad is shut out of New York City.
Vanderbilt, in essence, single-handedly erected a blockade around the nation's largest city, cutting it off from contact with the rest of the country. He was now asserting his dominance.
Ladies and gentlemen, this train will not be going any farther.
We're gonna watch them bleed.
The Civil War has left America in ruins. For the first time in its history, the nation must rebuild. Over 50,000 miles of railroad track have transformed the country. Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt grew up poor, but has created a railroad empire, making him the richest man in the country. At 72, he's 30 years past the average life expectancy, and his competitors see him as weak. It's a mistake they'll come to regret. Locked in a battle for control of the rail lines east of the Mississippi, the Commodore is holding nothing back.
I want you to close the Albany Bridge. We're gonna watch them bleed.
Vanderbilt controls the only bridge into New York City, America's busiest port. Seizing an opportunity, he sets up a blockade.
This train will not be going any farther.
Shutting the bridge leaves millions of pounds of cargo unable to reach the rest of the country, and slowly bleeds his competitors dry. before their stock is worthless, the presidents of the rival railroad try to sell all their shares. Word quickly reaches Wall Street, triggering a massive sell-off.
New York Central shares are dropping fast.
How low?
$20 a share.
Buy everything you can.
Too comfortable. Just over as much? Maybe just for one.
Vanderbilt was buying all of that stock that suddenly flooded the market at rock-bottom prices.
3 aces.
In just days, Vanderbilt takes control of the rival railroad, creating the largest single rail company in America.
The New York Central Railroad became the centerpiece of his empire, and it came to him as the sudden result of a skillfully executed campaign to get revenge.
Railroads soon crisscross America, tying together the country in a way that just 15 years earlier was unimaginable, and providing over 180,000 jobs. Laying tracks becomes America's engine for unprecedented growth.
Railroads allowed the industrial economy to boom in ways that it couldn't have before.
One advance after the other, which essentially was led by the railroads, largely because there was a need to close the gap between those east of the Mississippi and those on the West Coast.
Vanderbilt has made himself the undisputed king of railroads. And now he wants the world to know it. He envisions a monument that will symbolize his immense power.
Work will begin on building a new station that will bring together the three railroads, the Harlem, the Hudson, and the Central. It shall be in the heart of New York and be called the Grand Central Depot.
Thousands of workers labor over the next 2 years on the most ambitious urban construction project America has ever seen. Grand Central is the biggest building in all of New York City and the biggest train station in the country, covering some 22 acres.
This enormous building towered over every other building in New York at the time. And it was a physical symbol of the size and power of Vanderbilt's railroad empire. Its importance as a physical symbol, as a physical capital of his empire, cannot be underestimated. And it still stamps New York's geography to this day.
Vanderbilt may be on top of the world, but his blind ambition will soon make him vulnerable to a challenge coming from the most unlikely pair imaginable.
The Vanderbilt money.
growth of the railroads thrusts America into the biggest building expansion the country has ever seen, led by a new breed of leader.
The story of America isn't just the story of the patriots that helped build the democracy. The reason the United States is the leading economy in the world is because of the work of entrepreneurs who created entire industries that propelled the United States to be the leader of the free world.
One man, Cornelius Vanderbilt, through brute force and intimidation, has made himself the undisputed king of the railroads. He now owns 40% of America's train lines. But he wants them all.
To me, it's always what's next, and I think that's what drives most very successful people. It's never about the money. I mean, that's a way of keeping score. It's about achievement, and it's about winning a game, and it's about upping the ante.
Chicago is America's fastest-growing city. The line connecting it to New York is the most traveled and valuable in all the world. And it's not Vanderbilt's. To make his empire complete, he must gain control of the Erie Line.
The Erie was one of the relatively early publicly traded corporations. Vanderbilt had the advantage of millions and millions of dollars. Deep pockets are always an advantage when you're trying to gain control of a corporation.
Vanderbilt instructs his agents to buy up as much stock as possible, demanding control of the company by the end of the week. It's a vintage Vanderbilt move, one he pioneered, known today as a hostile takeover. But his attempt will be thwarted by an even more ingenious idea, cooked up by two unknowns, Jay Gould and Jim Fisk.
All right. The mistake that the Erie Board have made is that they have telegraphed where they need to expand without securing the land first.
Gould and Fisk are stuck in middle management at the Erie, but they represent the new America that Vanderbilt is helping to create, one of self-made men with ruthless ambition. And after years of watching the Commodore dominate, they're eager to build their own empire. They recognize Vanderbilt's plan to buy the line and see the opportunity they've been waiting for.
Competition, I think it's good for the system, and it's really, I think, what most businesses is about, is doing a better job on out-hustling your competitors.
Gould and Fisk begin printing new shares of stock. Using a printing press they set up in the basement of the Erie offices. Each share they print dilutes Vanderbilt's stake in the company, and they print over 100,000.
There was some fine print in one of the clauses of the Erie's charter that allowed the board of directors to issue new stock, unbeknownst to shareholders. Go. And so the more shares that Vanderbilt bought, the more he had to buy in order to approach that magic majority.
Their plan is known as watering down stock. Highly illegal today. At the time, it had never been imagined. Its simplicity is brilliant. And Wall Street is never the same.
The only rule was there were no rules. Whatever it took to put your competition out of business, they were going to try to do it.
Unaware, Vanderbilt continues to buy.
Think of the look on his face. Oh, God, I wish I could be a fly on that wall.
The freshly printed shares are hand-delivered to Vanderbilt.
Here are the Erie shares. I assume we control the company now.
Toast! A toast!
To money.
To Vanderbilt's money!
Vanderbilt has bought $7 million of watered-down stock from Gould and Fisk. Today, worth over $1 billion. Vanderbilt has been underestimated before. But if you come at the king, you shouldn't expect to win. The greatest growth explosion in America's short life is underway. Rail lines now connect huge expanses of the country. Controlling them means having power that just 5 years earlier was unimaginable. Many are staking their claim.
I think there are people in every generation that have a vision that transcends their moment in their time.
Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt owns more miles of rail than anyone in the world. But like all men of power, he faces constant challenges.
Competition gets very aggressive. People have no idea how aggressive it is. And sometimes you don't even hear because what goes on behind your back is not a pretty picture.
At the height of his power, Vanderbilt is outsmarted by a pair of unknowns.
To Vanderbilt's money!
Jay Gould and Jim Fisk have fleeced the Commodore out of millions. And they want the world to know it.
Thank you. Don't mind if I do.
It is no secret what Vanderbilt has been trying to do. He owns more railroads than anybody else. Well, Gould and me, we have struck a blow for the little guy. Now, sure, he may be rich and sure, he may be powerful, but somebody had to stand up to the old bastard.
It was a humiliating defeat for the Commodore, a man who was so fiercely competitive, who wanted to win at absolutely everything, to whom money was so important. And here he was, defeated and insulted publicly by Gould and Fisk.
Gould and Fisk may be on top of the world, but they've awakened a sleeping lion. Vanderbilt vows to never be beaten again.
They don't think in terms of money. They think in terms of winning. Now, naturally, if you win big in business, money follows. But that shouldn't be your objective. Your objective should be to win. To win, win, win all the time. Not sometimes, every time.
Vanderbilt immediately begins looking for a new edge. He realizes that the railroads have been overbuilt, and the future of the industry isn't in building new lines, but in transporting new cargo.
Innovation is not a big breakthrough invention every time. Innovation is a constant thing. But if you don't have an innovative company coming to work every day to find a better way, you don't have a company. You're getting ready to die on the vine.
If Vanderbilt can corner the market on a new source of freight, one that can keep his trains constantly full, he'll be able to control the railroad industry. And the Commodore knows just where to look. Oil is revolutionizing life in America. Crude from the ground is being refined into kerosene. A safe and inexpensive source of light. And that access to light is completely changing the way Americans live. Before kerosene, the average American didn't have access to a consistent light source. When the sun came down, darkness ruled. Kerosene is a phenomenon that will forever change the world. And Vanderbilt knows it's his next opportunity to cash in.
The idea is to see what's missing. That's what a creative entrepreneur does. He serves people with things that they need. Some people can't find a new thing to do. But sometimes you see something that everybody has to have. It's like, oh man, I gotta give them this. And then you go to work on it because they need it.
Vanderbilt sees the demand for kerosene skyrocketing all across the country. He knows that to meet the demand, the makers of kerosene will need a new way to ship their oil. If Vanderbilt can corner the market on those oil shipments, he'll propel himself back to the top of the railroad industry. All he needs to do now is find a supplier.
We're going to extend along the South Shore to Cleveland.
Why Cleveland?
Cleveland is a small city of just under 50,000, but it's sitting on top of an ocean of oil. Eastern Ohio is the Middle East of its day, and the area around Cleveland is one of the largest oil fields in the world. Vanderbilt learns about a refinery built near the railroads in Cleveland, the perfect mark for his master plan. He reaches out to the owner, a struggling young oil man Vanderbilt is hoping to pluck from obscurity. That oil man is John D. Rockefeller.
Why are we paying so much on plumbers? We run a refinery. So we start making our own pipes. At this rate, we'll be lucky if we break even this year.
If you want to call it a day, John, just say. I should go.
Is everything all right?
It's fine.
At the age of 27, Rockefeller is in the early stages of building his refining business, but his company is teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. Vanderbilt sees him as someone he can manipulate to his advantage. An exclusive deal to ship Rockefeller's oil will guarantee that the Commodore's trains stay filled with cargo. Vanderbilt invites Rockefeller to meet with him in New York. For the young oil man, the meeting is the opportunity of a lifetime, a way out of his troubles, and a way to save his company from complete collapse.
Rockefeller, he respected Vanderbilt. He could see what he had achieved. Vanderbilt was setting the pattern and the archetype of what Rockefeller himself wanted to be. He wanted to be the Vanderbilt of petroleum. That's the way he saw himself.
As Rockefeller prepares for his trip to New York, Vanderbilt's plan is set in motion. The train departs Cleveland at 6:25 a.m. America is rising. The country is experiencing a period of growth like none it's ever seen. Railroads have united the states, and commerce flows with a speed never before thought possible. The man at the forefront of this explosive change is Cornelius Vanderbilt. But at 76, he realizes that the railroads have been overbuilt. To stay ahead of the competition, the Commodore turns to a new exploding industry and a struggling young oil man, John D. Rockefeller. Vanderbilt invites him to New York City for a meeting. Fate intervenes.
The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He restoreth my soul.
John Rockefeller narrowly missed the train, one that would have carried him to his certain death. The close call has a profound impact on the young oil man.
He leadeth me into paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Amen.
A man of deep faith, he becomes convinced that God has spared him for a reason.
Without thinking that he himself, in particular, was chosen by God to become this great business success, Rockefeller believed that everything was divinely ordained. So nothing happened in the world without God's will, without God's blessing.
Rockefeller once again heads to meet with Vanderbilt as a changed man. Where before he was intimidated and facing bankruptcy, now he's a man of destiny. Cornelius Vanderbilt may be the richest and most powerful man in the country, accustomed to getting what he wants. But he has no idea what he's about to encounter.
Every business is about understanding people, which people you have to get through, which people you have to embrace, which people you have to jump over, which people you have to push out of the way. That's the game.
Cornelius Vanderbilt may be the richest and most powerful man in the country, accustomed to getting what he wants. But he has no idea what he's about to encounter.